The train rattled into Prospect Station 40 minutes late, wheezing steam like a dying animal. Lydia Hale pressed her forehead against the window, watching Montana unfold in shades of brown and gray. Endless plains, skeletal trees, mountains that looked like broken teeth against a colorless sky. Her carpetbag sat between her feet, everything she owned compressed into 12 pounds of fabric and desperation. She'd read Adrian's letters so many times the paper had gone soft at the creases. Simple life. Honest work. A home, if you'll have it. He'd written like a man who didn't waste words, who meant what he said. She'd liked that, trusted it even. Back in Philadelphia, trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. But out here, maybe things were different. The train lurched to a stop. Lydia stood, smoothing her travel-stained dress, and stepped onto the platform. The stairs hit her immediately. A woman in a blue wool coat froze mid-step, eyes going wide. Two men by the station house stopped talking, their conversation dying like someone had cut the strings. A boy hauling luggage actually dropped a trunk, the crash echoing across the platform. Lydia's stomach tightened. She scanned the crowd, looking for Adrian, tall, he'd written, dark hair, usually in work clothes. But all she found were faces turning away the moment she met their eyes. Whispers rippled through the small crowd like wind through dry grass. "Miss Hale?" She turned. A man in a black suit stood 3 feet away, hat in his hands, expression carefully neutral. Too carefully, like he was working hard to keep something off his face. "I'm Lydia Hale," she said. "Are you—" "Thomas Brennan. I work for the Crow family." He reached for her bag before she could protest, his movements efficient, practiced. "The carriage is this way." "I thought Adrian would—" "Mr. Crow had business to attend to." Brennan's voice was flat, almost rehearsed. "He sends his apologies." Lydia followed him across the platform, feeling every eye track her movement. A woman whispered something to her companion, and the word that carried was, "Poor thing." Lydia's jaw tightened. She'd been poor her whole life, had worn the same dress 3 days running more times than she could count, had gone to bed hungry enough times to stop noticing. She didn't need anyone's pity. The carriage waiting at the edge of the station wasn't what she'd expected. She'd imagined a farm wagon, maybe a buckboard, something practical and worn. This was lacquered black wood with brass fittings, pulled by 2 horses that looked like they ate better than most people. Brennan loaded her bag with the kind of careful handling you'd give something fragile, something that might break. "How far is the farm?" Lydia asked as he helped her up. Something flickered across Brennan's face. "About 40 minutes, miss." The carriage rolled forward, and Lydia watched Prospect Station disappear behind them. The town was small, a main street, maybe 24 buildings, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and strangers stood out like blood on snow. She'd expected that. What she hadn't expected was the way people had looked at her. Not curious, not welcoming, afraid. The road cut through open country, past homesteads that squatted against the landscape like they were trying not to be noticed. Cattle grazed in fields bordered by barbed wire that gleamed like knife edges in the flat light. Everything looked hard out here, unforgiving. "Have you worked for the Crows long?" Lydia asked. 15 years. "Then you must know Adrian well." Brennan's shoulders shifted just slightly. "I know the family, miss." "What's he like?" "In his letters, he seemed—" She stopped, suddenly aware of how desperate that sounded. "I just meant—" "Mr. Crow is a complicated man." Brennan's voice was so carefully empty, it felt like a warning. "You'll form your own opinion soon enough." Lydia's hands twisted in her lap. The leather seat was soft, the carriage suspension smooth. Too smooth for a poor farmer. Too smooth for someone who'd written about making do and simple pleasures. She thought about asking, then swallowed the question. Maybe Adrian had borrowed the carriage. Maybe he'd wanted to make a good impression. "Maybe you're already lying to yourself," whispered a voice in her head that sounded like her mother. The road began to climb. Trees closed in on either side, pine and aspen, their branches reaching overhead like fingers. The light changed, went gray and cold. Lydia pulled her shawl tighter. "We're on Crow land now," Brennan said. "How much land does he have?" "The family holdings are extensive." Not an answer. Lydia filed that away, adding it to the growing list of things that didn't fit. The silence stretched. She tried again. Is the house far from town? I saw a church back in Prospect. Do people usually... Miss Hale. Brennan's voice cut through her rambling. Permission to speak plainly? Please. He didn't turn around. Whatever you think you know about this place, about this family, forget it. Listen more than you talk. Trust your instincts. And if something feels wrong, he paused. It probably is. Cold spread through Lydia's chest. What are you telling me? I'm not telling you anything, just offering advice. Why? Brennan's jaw worked like he was chewing on words he couldn't say. Because you seem like a decent person, and decent people don't usually... He stopped, cleared his throat. We're almost there. The trees opened up and Lydia's breath caught. It wasn't a farmhouse. It was a mansion. 3 stories of stone and timber rose against the mountainside like something that had grown there, massive and dark and completely wrong. Wings stretched out on either side of a central tower, windows reflecting the sky like blank eyes. The grounds were manicured, a deliberate wildness that probably cost more than most people made in a year. Gardens traced geometric patterns between gravel paths, and in the distance, Lydia could see outbuildings, stables, maybe a carriage house, structures that suggested staff and money, and a life completely disconnected from anything Adrian's letters had described. This is the farm? Her voice came out smaller than she'd meant it to. This is the Crow estate. The carriage rolled to a stop in front of broad stone steps. Brennan climbed down, opened her door, and offered his hand. Lydia took it, her legs unsteady as she stepped onto gravel that crunched like breaking bones. The front door opened. A woman emerged, tall and straight-backed, dressed in black that looked expensive even from a distance. She was maybe 60, with silver hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, and a face that might have been handsome once, before something had hardened it into stone. She stood at the top of the steps like a judge on a bench, looking down at Lydia with eyes that missed nothing. Miss Hale, the woman said. Not a greeting. A confirmation. I am Constance Crow, Adrian's aunt. Lydia climbed the steps on legs that wanted to turn and run. Up close, Constance was even more imposing, taller than most men, with a presence that seemed to push the air out of the space around her. Her dress was perfect. Her posture was perfect. Everything about her screamed control. Ma'am, Lydia managed. I'm pleased to... Are you? Constance's lips curved, but the smile never reached her eyes. That remains to be seen. She stepped aside. Come. You'll want to settle in before dinner. The entrance hall was enormous. Lydia's entire Philadelphia boarding house could have fit inside it. Polished wood floors, a staircase that curved upward like a spine, paintings on the walls that looked old and expensive. A chandelier hung overhead, more crystal than Lydia had ever seen in one place. Your bag will be brought up, Constance said, already moving. Her footsteps clicked across the floor like a clock counting down. Adrian is occupied with business matters. You'll meet him at dinner. I thought... In his letters, he said... Constance stopped, turned. Whatever Adrian wrote, I'm sure he had his reasons. But you should understand something, Miss Hale. She moved closer, and Lydia fought the urge to step back. This family has certain expectations, certain standards. We've had... A pause. Complications in the past. I trust you won't add to them. I don't understand. No, you don't. Constance resumed walking. Follow me. They climbed the staircase, past portraits of stern-faced people in old-fashioned clothes, their eyes following Lydia like she was an intruder. The second-floor hallway stretched in both directions, doors closed like secrets. Constance led her to a room at the far end. This was... Constance stopped herself. This will be your room, for now. She opened the door and Lydia stepped into luxury that made her feel dirty by comparison. A 4-poster bed with embroidered linens, a wardrobe that could have held 10 women's wardrobes, a window overlooking gardens that looked like someone had tried to tame the wilderness and only halfway succeeded. Dinner's at 7, Constance said. Don't be late. She left, closing the door with a soft click that sounded like a cell locking. Lydia stood in the center of the room, her heart hammering. This wasn't right. None of this was right. Adrian had written about a small farm, about building something together, about a simple life away from the complications and cruelty of cities. He'd written like a man with rough hands and honest intentions. He'd lied. Or someone
This
had
story
lied for
was
him.
posted on the channel west
She
of
moved to the
Betrayal.
window, pressed
Please
her
do
palm
not
against the cold
repost it
glass.
in any form.
The gardens below were beautiful in a hostile way, all sharp edges and careful control. Beyond them, she could see the edge of the forest, dark pines climbing toward mountains that looked like walls. A knock at the door made her jump. "Miss?" A young voice, hesitant. Lydia opened the door. A girl stood in the hallway, maybe 14, wearing a maid's uniform that hung loose on her thin frame. She held Lydia's carpetbag in both hands, knuckles white with effort. "I brought your things," the girl whispered. "Thank you." Lydia took the bag, and the girl flinched like she expected to be hit. "Are you all right?" The girl's eyes darted down the hallway, then back to Lydia. "You should leave." "What?" "Before dinner. Before you meet him. Just—" The girl's voice cracked. "The last one didn't listen. She stayed, and now she's—" "Emma!" Constance's voice cracked like a whip from somewhere down the hall. The girl's face went white. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping over her own feet. "I have to go. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She ran, footsteps fading down the corridor. Lydia stood in the doorway, her pulse loud in her ears. The last one. The girl had said the last one. Like there had been others, like Lydia was just the newest in a line of what? Failed brides? Disappeared women? She closed the door, locked it, then checked the lock twice to be sure. Her bag felt heavier than it should. She set it on the bed, opened it, pulled out the few possessions she'd brought. 2 more dresses, both worn, a hairbrush, the bundle of letters from Adrian tied with string. She untied them, spread them across the bed, read them again, looking for clues she'd missed. The land is harsh but beautiful. It shapes you if you let it. I won't pretend this is easy, but it's honest. There's room here for someone willing to build something real. Words on paper. She'd built a whole future out of words on paper, and now she was standing in a mansion that shouldn't exist, being warned by a terrified girl about a woman who'd come before. Lydia looked at her reflection in the wardrobe mirror. She looked small, scared. The kind of woman people dismissed, the kind who disappeared and no one noticed. No. She'd spent her whole life being invisible, being the girl who served drinks and ducked her head and took whatever scraps the world offered. She'd come out here to change that, to be something more than a ghost in her own life. If something was wrong here, and everything about this place screamed that something was deeply, dangerously wrong, then she needed to know what it was. Before dinner, before she met Adrian, before she committed to something she couldn't escape. She changed into her least worn dress, fixed her hair, made herself look presentable. Then she unlocked the door and stepped into the hallway. The house was quiet in the wrong way, not peaceful, but holding its breath. Lydia moved carefully, trying to look like she belonged, like she had every right to be exploring. The hallway branched in multiple directions. She chose left, following it past more closed doors, more portraits with judgmental eyes. A voice drifted up from somewhere below, male, deep, angry. "Cannot afford another complication. Then perhaps you should have thought of that before." A woman's voice, cold and sharp, Constance. "I did what was necessary." Necessary. A bitter laugh. "Is that what we're calling it?" Lydia crept closer to the stairs, staying in the shadows. She couldn't see them, but the voices were clearer now. "She's already here." The man, Adrian, it had to be Adrian. "What would you have me do?" "What you should have done last time. What you should have done before any of this started." "I won't." "You will." Constance's voice dropped to something dark and final. "Or I will. We've protected this family for too long to let sentiment destroy it now." Silence. Then footsteps, moving away. Lydia pressed herself against the wall, her breath trapped in her chest. Protected this family from what? And what had happened last time? She needed answers. Real ones, not cryptic warnings and overheard arguments. The house had to have records, papers, something that would explain what she'd walked into. She continued down the hallway, testing doors. Locked. Locked. A linen closet. Locked. Then one that opened. It was a study. Masculine, dark wood, and leather. Papers scattered across a desk. Lydia slipped inside, closed the door behind her. The desk drawers were locked, but the papers on top weren't. Business documents, legal language she didn't fully understand, land deeds, railroad contracts, amounts of money that made her dizzy. She rifled through them, hands shaking, looking for, she didn't know what. Something, anything. Then she found it. A letter, different from the business papers. Feminine handwriting, the ink slightly smudged. If you're reading this, I'm already gone. Lydia's vision tunneled. She picked up the letter, forcing herself to focus. They're watching. All of them. Trust no one in this house. Not the lawyer, not the staff, and especially not the family. They killed before. I found the records, the real ones, buried in the library. 3 women in 10 years, all accidents. All brides who asked too many questions. I tried to run. They caught me before I reached the station. If you're smart, you'll find this and leave tonight. If you're brave or stupid, you'll finish what I started. The evidence is in the letter ended. Just stopped, mid-sentence, like someone had interrupted her. Lydia's hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled. 3 women, 10 years. Accidents. The door opened behind her. She spun, dropping the letter. A man stood in the doorway. Tall, dark hair, maybe 30. With features that would have been handsome if they weren't arranged in an expression of careful blankness. He wore work clothes, dirt on his boots, but somehow he fit this house in a way Lydia knew she never would. You must be Lydia, he said quietly. Adrian. He nodded, stepped inside, closed the door, locked it. Lydia's heart kicked against her ribs. I need you to understand something, Adrian said. He moved carefully, like approaching a spooked horse. Whatever you found, whatever you think you know, it's more complicated than, did you kill her? The words came out harder than Lydia had known she was capable of. The woman who wrote this? Adrian's face did something complicated. No. But you know who did. He didn't answer. Tell me the truth, Lydia said. Right now, or I walk out of this house and I don't stop walking until I'm back on a train to Philadelphia. Adrian looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted, cracked, just slightly. If you run, they'll catch you, just like they caught her. Then tell me why I should stay. Because... He stopped, ran a hand through his hair, and for the first time he looked like something other than a carefully controlled stranger. He looked tired, desperate. Because I need help. Because this family is poison, and I don't know how to stop it alone. Because that woman, Catherine, her name was Catherine, she was trying to expose them, and she died for it. And if you leave now, she died for nothing. Lydia's throat was tight. Why me? Why bring another woman into this if it's so dangerous? I didn't have a choice. Adrian's voice was raw now, the careful control stripped away. My aunt arranged it. She arranges everything. I tried to stop the letters, but by the time I knew what she'd done, you were already on your way. You could have warned me. I tried. I sent a telegram to the station, told them to tell you not to come. Did you get it? Lydia thought back. The station master, hurrying toward her as she boarded, then getting pulled away by someone else. The way he'd looked back at her, frustrated. No. Of course not, Adrian laughed, bitter. She controls everything. The town, the rail line, the sheriff, all of it. Then how do we... The doorknob rattled. Someone was trying to get in. Adrian grabbed Lydia's arm, pulled her toward a different door, a side exit she hadn't noticed. Listen to me. At dinner, don't challenge her, don't argue. Act like the meek, grateful bride she expects. Can you do that? Can you do that? His grip tightened, urgent. Yes. Good. He released her, stepped back. We'll talk later, tonight, after everyone's asleep. Meet me in the library, 3rd door on the left, ground floor. Can you find it? I think so. Good. He moved to unlock the door, paused. Lydia, if this is too much, if you want to leave, I'll help you. I'll get you out. But if you stay, his eyes met hers, and she saw something dangerous there, something broken. If you stay, we finish this, together, all the way to the end. The doorknob rattled again, harder. "Do we have a deal?" Adrian asked. Lydia thought about Philadelphia.
This story was posted on
about
the
boarding
channel
house
west
where
of
she'd lived,
Betrayal.
3 to a room,
Please do not
where the
repost
walls
it
were
in
thin
any
and
form.
the rats were bold, and the men who came around looked at her like she was merchandise. About working 12-hour days for wages that barely covered bread. About the constant grinding awareness that she was one bad day from the street. She thought about Catherine, whoever she'd been, writing a warning letter she'd never finished. About 3 other women, dead and dismissed as accidents. She thought about the scared girl in the hallway, about Constance's cold eyes, about a house built on blood and silence. "Deal," Lydia said. Adrian unlocked the door. Constance stood outside, her face carved from ice. "Dinner," she said. "Now." The dining room felt like a courtroom. Long table, dark wood polished to a mirror shine, chairs that looked like thrones. Crystal glasses caught the light from candles that burned too steady, too perfect. Lydia sat where Constance had pointed, her spine straight, hands folded in her lap like she'd been taught in the orphanage when important people came through. Act small. Act grateful. Don't give them a reason to notice you. Adrian sat at the head of the table, 5 feet away, but it might as well have been a mile. He'd changed into a suit that probably cost more than Lydia had earned in her entire life. His face was blank again, that careful emptiness back in place like a mask he'd practiced wearing. Constance presided from the opposite end, her posture so rigid it looked painful. To Lydia's left sat a man who hadn't bothered introducing himself, 50-something, round face, eyes that moved constantly like he was cataloging everything for future use. He wore expensive clothes badly, the fabric rumpled, his collar slightly crooked. "Miss Hale," Constance said, and it wasn't a greeting, it was a summons. "I trust your room is adequate." "It's more than adequate, ma'am. Thank you." "You come from Philadelphia, I understand." "Yes, ma'am." "What did you do there?" The question landed like a knife on the table. Lydia met her eyes, kept her voice level. "I worked. Various positions." "How vague." Constance's smile could have cut glass. "Adrian mentioned you were employed at a tavern?" The judgment hung in the air, thick enough to choke on. Lydia felt heat crawl up her neck but forced it down. "I served drinks, yes. Honest work." "I'm sure it was." Constance lifted her wineglass, examined it against the candlelight. "Though one wonders what kind of woman accepts a marriage proposal from a stranger." "The kind who's tired of being hungry," Lydia said before she could stop herself. Silence dropped like a guillotine blade. The man to her left made a sound that might have been a laugh, quickly smothered. Adrian's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Constance set down her glass with deliberate care. Honesty. How refreshing. Her eyes went cold. "Though I wonder if you understand what you've agreed to. Marriage isn't simply an escape from poverty, Miss Hale. It's a binding contract with consequences." "I understand contracts." "Do you?" Constance leaned forward slightly. "Then you understand that once you sign the documents, once the ceremony is performed, you become part of this family, subject to its rules, its expectations, its—" She paused. "Traditions." The way she said traditions made Lydia's skin crawl. She glanced at Adrian, looking for some signal, some indication of what to say. He was staring at his plate like the pattern in the china held secrets. "I'm willing to learn," Lydia said carefully. "Are you?" Not a question, a challenge. A door opened. The girl from earlier, Emma, entered carrying a covered dish, her hand shaking so badly the lid rattled. She set it in the center of the table, eyes down, and started to retreat. "Emma," Constance said, and the girl froze. "Did you speak with Miss Hale this afternoon?" Emma's face went white. I just brought her bag, ma'am." "And nothing else?" "No, ma'am." The lie was obvious, desperate. Constance studied her like examining an insect. "You're dismissed. And Emma, if I hear of any further conversations with our guest, you'll be looking for employment elsewhere. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." Emma practically ran from the room, Lydia's hands clenched in her lap. The urge to say something, to defend the girl, burned in her throat, but Adrian's warning echoed in her head. "Don't challenge her. Act meek. Wait." The man to her left cleared his throat. Perhaps we should discuss more pleasant matters. His voice was smooth, practiced. I don't believe we've been properly introduced. Harold Chambers, family attorney. He extended a hand. Lydia shook it. His palm was soft, damp. Mr. Chambers. Please, Harold. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'll be handling the legal formalities. Quite straightforward, really. A few signatures, some paperwork. We can take care of it tomorrow morning, if you're agreeable. What kind of paperwork? Standard marriage contract, property agreements, nothing to concern yourself with. If I'm signing it, I'd like to understand it. Harold's smile tightened. Of course, though I should mention the language can be quite technical. Perhaps it would be easier if I simply explained the relevant portions? I can read. Silence again. Lydia was getting tired of the way these people use silence like a weapon. She wants to read the contracts, Harold. Adrian's voice cut through the tension, flat and hard. Let her read the damn contracts. Constance's eyes snapped to him. Adrian, she has a right to know what she's signing. Rights. Constance pronounced the word like it tasted bad. How modern of you, though I recall your previous stance on such matters was quite different. Something passed between them, dark and loaded. Adrian's face went tight. Things change, he said quietly. Indeed they do. Constance turned back to Lydia. Very well, read to your heart's content. Though I suggest you read quickly, we have a schedule to maintain. Servants brought food, roast beef, potatoes, vegetables arranged like artwork. Lydia's stomach was too knotted to eat, but she forced herself to take small bites, to go through the motions. The meal dragged on, punctuated by Harold's attempts at small talk that felt like interrogation, and Constance's barbed observations about everything from Lydia's posture to her accent. Adrian barely spoke. He ate mechanically, responded when directly addressed, but mostly seemed to be somewhere else entirely. Lydia watched him when she thought no one was looking, trying to reconcile the desperate man from the study with this hollow-eyed stranger. Finally, mercifully, Constance stood. I'm retiring, Miss Hale. Breakfast is at 8. Don't be late. She swept from the room, Harold following like a trained dog. Lydia and Adrian sat in the echoing silence. She waited for him to say something, to acknowledge what had happened in the study, but he just pushed his chair back and stood. Adrian, third door on the left, he said without looking at her. Midnight, don't let anyone see you. Then he was gone too, and Lydia was alone with half-eaten food and too many questions burning in her chest. She made her way back to her room, every footstep loud in the quiet house. The hallway felt longer than before, the portraits more menacing. She kept thinking about Catherine's letter. 3 women in 10 years, all accidents, all brides who asked too many questions. Well, she was already asking questions. Might as well commit. Her room felt like a cage. Lydia locked the door, wedged a chair under the handle for good measure, then sat on the bed and waited for midnight. She tried to think through what she knew, to make sense of the pieces, but they didn't fit together in any way that made sense. Adrian needed help, but wouldn't say with what. Constance controlled everything but seemed threatened by a broke girl from Philadelphia. There was money, vast amounts of it, but the family acted like they were protecting something more important than wealth. The clock on the mantel ticked toward midnight with agonizing slowness. Lydia changed into darker clothes, practical boots. If she needed to run, she wanted to be ready. At 11:45, she eased open her door. The hallway was dark, lit only by moonlight through the tall windows at each end. She moved slowly, testing each floorboard before putting her weight on it, trying to remember the route to the ground floor. The house creaked around her, settling sounds that made her freeze repeatedly, heart hammering. The main staircase was exposed, too risky. She found a servant's stair at the back of the corridor, narrow and steep, and descended into darkness. The ground floor was a maze of corridors she hadn't seen before. She tried to orient herself, counting doors. Third on the left. The library door was ajar, warm light spilling through the crack. Lydia slipped inside and pulled it shut behind her. The room was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined every wall, packed with leather-bound volumes that looked older than the house. A fireplace burned low, casting dancing shadows. And standing by the window, backlit and tense, was Adrian. "You came," he said. Did you think I wouldn't? I hoped you'd be smart enough to run. He turned, and in the firelight, he looked exhausted.
This story
older.
was posted on the channel
I'm
west
glad
of
you didn't.
Betrayal. Please do
Tell
not
me what happened to
repost it
Catherine.
in any form.
Adrian moved to a desk in the corner, unlocked a drawer, pulled out a folder thick with papers. She came here 9 months ago, answered the same kind of advertisement you did. Poor farmer seeking wife, simple life, all of it. My aunt arranged it, same as she arranged yours. Why? Because I need a wife. Because this family's reputation requires certain appearances. Because Constance decided it was time, and what Constance decides happens. He set the folder on a reading table, gestured for Lydia to sit. Catherine was smart, too smart. She started noticing things within a week, asking questions about the money, about where it came from. Where does it come from? Adrian's laugh was bitter. Everywhere. Cattle, timber, mining. But the real money, the fortune that built all this, that came from the railroad. I don't understand. 30 years ago, when they were pushing the Northern Pacific through Montana territory, my grandfather was one of the primary landowners in the path. He made a fortune selling right-of-way. Only problem was, most of that land wasn't actually his. Lydia felt something cold settle in her stomach. He stole it. He acquired it through questionable means, forged deeds, intimidation, violence when necessary. Whole families displaced. Some disappeared entirely. Adrian opened the folder, spread documents across the table. Catherine found records, original deeds, letters, testimony from people who'd tried to fight back. She was building a case. Against your family. Against my grandfather specifically. But yes, the evidence implicated the whole family. My aunt knew. My father knew. They all knew. And they all benefited. He pulled out a photograph, old and faded. A woman in frontier clothes, standing in front of a burned cabin. This was the Mackenzie homestead, family of 5. They refused to sell. One night their house caught fire. All 5 died. Lydia's hand trembled as she took the photograph. That's murder. That's business, according to my grandfather. Adrian's voice was flat. There were others, dozens of others. Catherine documented 18 separate incidents of suspected violence. She was going to take it to the territorial authorities, maybe even federal investigators. What stopped her? She disappeared. Adrian pulled out another document, this one newer, a death certificate. Found at the bottom of the ravine 3 miles from here, broken neck. The official ruling was accidental death, lost her footing on the trail, fell, died instantly. Lydia studied the certificate. You don't believe that? Catherine was an experienced rider. She knew these mountains. And the night she died, she'd told me she was ready to go public. She had everything arranged, a contact in Helena, a safe place to stay. She was supposed to leave the next morning. He met Lydia's eyes. She died 12 hours before she could get out. Who killed her? I don't know. I wasn't here that night. I was in Billings on business. Business my aunt insisted couldn't wait. By the time I got back, Catherine was dead and buried, and the sheriff had already ruled it an accident. Adrian's hands clenched. But someone knew. Someone knew what she'd found and stopped her. Lydia's mind was racing. The other women, the 3 from before. I don't know all the details. I was younger, away at school for most of it, but I remember whispers. A bride who got sick died within weeks. Another who ran away, though her body was found months later. A third who supposedly fell down the stairs. He shook his head. I didn't connect them until Catherine, until I saw what was happening and realized it had happened before. And you brought me here anyway. The anger surprised her with its intensity. Knowing all this, knowing what happened to her, you let your aunt bring another woman into this house? I tried to stop it, Adrian's control cracked. I sent that telegram. I wrote letters telling my aunt to cancel the arrangement. I did everything I could short of showing up at your boarding house and dragging you away. He ran both hands through his hair. But Constance doesn't listen. She decided I needed a wife, decided you were suitable, and made it happen. And if you'd never gotten on that train, she would have just found someone else. Someone who might not have survived their first week. So I'm what? Bait? You're a chance. Adrian's voice dropped. Catherine almost made it. She was close. If I'd been here, if I'd been paying attention instead of letting myself get sent away. He stopped, swallowed hard. You're smart. You're already suspicious. And unlike Catherine, you have me actually trying to help instead of being conveniently absent. Lydia stood, moved to the window. Outside, the grounds were silver with moonlight, beautiful and cold. What's the plan? We finish what Catherine started. Find the rest of the evidence, build an airtight case, and take it somewhere Constance can't bury it. The territorial authorities? Federal. There's a land fraud investigation happening in Wyoming right now. If we can connect our evidence to that, show it's part of a larger pattern. Adrian moved to stand beside her. There's an investigator, Robert Thorne. He's been looking into railroad corruption for years. If we can get the evidence to him, he'll act on it. Your aunt won't just let us walk out of here with documents. No, she won't. Adrian's reflection in the window looked grim, which is why we have to be careful. Gather evidence slowly, copy what we can, hide it where she won't think to look. And you have to play the role. The grateful bride, overwhelmed by all this luxury, too dazzled to ask difficult questions. I'm not a good liar. You don't have to lie. Just don't tell the whole truth. He turned to face her directly. Can you do this? Because if you can't, if this is too much, tell me now. I'll get you out tonight. There's a freight train that stops 5 miles from here at 3 a.m. I can have you on it. Lydia thought about running, about going back to Philadelphia, back to serving drinks and dodging grabbing hands and living in rooms that smelled like mold and desperation, about spending the rest of her life wondering what had happened here, who had killed Catherine, whether anyone would ever face justice for the people in that burned cabin. I'll do it, she said. You're sure? No. She met his eyes. But I'm doing it anyway. Something shifted in Adrian's expression. Relief, maybe. Or fear. All right, tomorrow morning, Harold will bring the marriage contracts. Read them, but don't refuse to sign. Look for anything unusual in the property clauses. Anything that mentions rights to documents or family records. What am I looking for? I don't know. But Catherine mentioned she'd found something in the contracts the other brides signed. Something that gave the family legal control over anything the wives discovered during the marriage. That's insane. That's Constance. Adrian moved back to the desk, started gathering the documents. She thinks of everything, controls everything. We have to assume she's already suspicious of you, that she's watching. The girl. Emma. She tried to warn me. Emma's been here 3 years. She saw what happened to Catherine. Adrian locked the folder back in the drawer. Stay away from her. If Constance thinks she's helping you, she'll dismiss her. Or worse. Worse? Adrian didn't answer, which was answer enough. Lydia wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire. What about you? If we're caught, I'm family. She won't kill me. He said it like he wasn't entirely sure. Besides, I'm the heir. Without me, everything goes to my cousin in Boston, and Constance would rather die than let that happen. Comforting. This isn't about comfort, it's about justice. Adrian crossed to her, and for the first time she saw real emotion on his face. Anger, grief. Catherine was 23 years old. She came out here looking for a better life, same as you. She didn't deserve to die because she stumbled onto my family's crimes. No, she didn't. They stood there in the firelight, 2 people bound by a dead woman's unfinished work. Lydia barely knew Adrian. Didn't trust him, not really. But she trusted the look in his eyes, the raw need for someone to pay for what had been done. I should go back, she said, before someone notices I'm gone. Be careful on the stairs. The 3rd one from the top creaks. How do you know which stairs I used? Because they all creak. This house tells on everyone. He walked her to the door, checked the hallway. Tomorrow at breakfast, Constance will probably test you, ask personal questions, probe for weakness. Don't give her any. I'll try. Lydia. He caught her arm as she started to leave. Thank you for staying, for giving a damn about someone you never met. She pulled free gently. Everyone deserves someone to give a damn. The trip back to her room felt longer than the trip down. Every shadow seemed to hide watchers. Every creak of the house made her freeze, heart pounding, waiting for lights to blaze and voices to demand what she was doing, skulking around at midnight. But she made it, slipped into her room, locked the door, collapsed on the bed with her pulse hammering in her ears. She'd committed now. signed on for something far more dangerous than a questionable marriage to a stranger. She was going to help expose a family of killers,
This story was
gather evidence
posted
that
on
could
the
destroy
channel
one of
west
the
of
most
Betrayal.
powerful dynasties
Please
in the
do not
territory.
repost it in
And
any
if she
form.
failed, she'd end up like Catherine, dead in a ravine, ruled in accident, forgotten. Lydia stared at the ceiling, watching shadows dance in the moonlight, and tried to convince herself she'd made the right choice. Sleep came eventually, thin and troubled, full of burning cabins and women falling through darkness. She woke to knocking, hard, insistent, the kind that said someone had been at it for a while. "Miss Hale, breakfast is being served." Constance's voice, sharp as a razor. Lydia dragged herself up, splashed water on her face from the basin, pulled on a dress with fingers that fumbled the buttons. Her reflection looked pale, exhausted. She pinched her cheeks to bring color back, tried to smooth her hair into something respectable. The dining room was already occupied when she arrived. Constance sat in her usual position, teacup raised like a weapon. Harold was there too, briefcase open, papers spread across the table. And Adrian, looking like he hadn't slept either. "You're late," Constance observed. "I apologize, I had trouble sleeping in a new place." "How inconvenient for you," Constance gestured to a chair. "Sit, eat quickly. Harold has prepared the contracts, and we have a great deal to accomplish today." Lydia sat. A plate appeared in front of her. Eggs, toast, bacon. Her stomach turned, but she forced herself to eat. Needed the fuel, needed to look normal. Harold cleared his throat. "As I mentioned last evening, these are quite standard documents. Marriage contract, property agreements, the usual formalities." He slid papers across to her. "If you'll just sign here, and here, an initial at the bottom of each page." "I'd like to read them first." Harold's smile went brittle. "Of course, though as I said, the language is rather technical. I'll manage." She pulled the contracts toward her, started reading. The language was dense, legal terminology that twisted around itself, but she pushed through it. Standard marriage clauses, property agreements stating that all assets remained with the Crow family. Then, buried in the third page, something that made her pause. The party of the second part agrees that any discoveries, documents, or information obtained during the course of the marriage remain the sole property of the Crow estate and may not be disclosed, reproduced, or distributed without express written permission. Lydia read it twice. Looked up to find Constance watching her with eyes like a hawk spotting prey. "Something unclear?" Constance asked. "This clause about discoveries and documents. What does that mean, exactly?" "Exactly what it says." Constance's voice was silk over steel. "This family has certain proprietary information. Business matters. We require discretion from anyone joining the household. Discretion is one thing. This says I can't disclose anything I find out while married. Is that a problem? It seems broad. It's necessary." Constance set down her teacup with deliberate care. The previous Mrs. Crow, Adrian's late mother, was quite indiscreet about family matters. It caused considerable difficulty. We've learned from that experience. Adrian's face went tight at the mention of his mother, but he said nothing. Lydia looked back at the contract, mind racing. This was what Catherine had found, the legal trap that prevented brides from exposing what they learned. "Sign this, and anything she discovered about the Crow family's crimes became their property, unable to be shared without their permission." "What if I don't sign?" she asked quietly. Silence crashed down. Harold's eyes widened. Constance went very still. "I beg your pardon?" Constance's voice could have frozen water. "What if I don't sign this particular clause? The rest seems reasonable, but this... Then there is no marriage." Constance leaned forward. "These contracts are not negotiable, Miss Hale. You sign all of it, or you sign none of it. Those are your options." "I see." "Do you?" Constance's eyes bored into her. "Let me be perfectly clear. You came here seeking marriage and security. We are offering both. But we require loyalty. Absolute loyalty. If you cannot provide that, you're welcome to return to Philadelphia, though I suspect the fare is more than you can afford." It was a trap, beautifully constructed. Sign away her right to expose them, or leave with nothing. Lydia looked at Adrian. He was staring at his plate, jaw clenched. No help there. She was on her own. "May I have a day to think about it?" she asked. "No." Constance's answer was immediate. You decide now. Sign the contracts and commit to this family, or leave on the noon train. Those are your choices. Lydia's hand trembled as she picked up the pen. She thought about Catherine, about the warning letter, about women who'd come before and died asking questions, thought about burned cabins and forged deeds, and a family that killed to protect their secrets. Thought about the fact that signing the contract meant nothing if they gathered enough evidence to destroy the Crows through legal channels. The contract couldn't protect them from federal prosecution. She signed, every page, every clause. Her hand steady by the end, signature clear and binding. Constance watched her finish, then smiled. It was the first time Lydia had seen her smile genuinely, and it was terrifying. Excellent, Constance said. Welcome to the family, Miss Hale. I do hope you'll last longer than the others. The ink was still wet on her signature when Constance stood, gathering the contracts like a general collecting surrender terms. Harold will file these with the county clerk this afternoon. The ceremony is scheduled for Saturday, 3 days. She paused at the door, looking back at Lydia with something that might have been satisfaction. I suggest you spend that time learning your place in this household. Then she was gone, Harold scurrying after her with his briefcase clutched to his chest like armor. Lydia sat frozen, staring at the empty doorway. 3 days. She had 3 days to gather evidence, find Catherine's proof, and figure out how to escape a contract she'd just signed. You did the right thing, Adrian said quietly. Did I? She turned on him, anger finally breaking through. I just signed away my right to speak, to tell anyone what I find here. A contract isn't worth the paper it's printed on if the people who wrote it are in federal prison. He kept his voice low, glancing toward the door. But we have to move fast now. Once you're married, they'll watch you even closer. They're already watching. Not like they will be. Adrian pushed his plate away, food untouched. Listen to me. Tonight, after dinner, Constance hosts a card game. Local businessmen, the sheriff, a few ranchers. It happens every Thursday. The house will be occupied. So that's when you search her private study, 3rd floor, east wing. She keeps documents there that don't exist anywhere else. Lydia's stomach dropped. You want me to break into Constance's study while she's hosting half the territory downstairs? It's the only time she's guaranteed to be out of that room for more than 5 minutes. Adrian leaned closer. Catherine found something there. She mentioned it in her last letter to me, said she'd discovered proof that connected everything. But she died before she could tell me what it was or where she'd hidden it. If Catherine already found it, why do I need to? Because whatever she found died with her, or Constance found it first and destroyed it. Adrian's jaw tightened. But Constance is compulsive about records. She documents everything, keeps copies of copies. If the proof existed once, another version exists somewhere. That's a lot of assumptions. It's all we have. Lydia stood, moved to the window. Outside, groundskeepers were trimming hedges with mechanical precision, every movement controlled. Everything in this place was controlled. What am I looking for? Ledgers, correspondence, anything dated between 1872 and 1875. That's when the railroad was being built, when most of the land was acquired. Look for names: Mackenzie, Sullivan, Chen, Whitmore. Those were the families who fought back hardest. And if I'm caught? Adrian didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was flat. Don't get caught. The rest of the day crawled by like something wounded. Lydia retreated to her room, claiming fatigue, actually pacing the floor and trying to plan. She had no experience breaking into locked rooms, no skills in espionage or theft. She was a tavern girl who could carry 6 glasses at once and remember complicated drink orders. This was so far outside her capabilities, it was almost funny. Except nothing about this was funny. Around 4, Emma knocked softly, bringing tea Lydia hadn't requested. The girl set the tray down with shaking hands, her eyes darting to the door every few seconds. You should drink it while it's hot, Emma whispered. Lydia poured a cup she didn't want. Thank you. Emma lingered, twisting her apron. You signed the papers. How did you, Everyone knows Mrs. Crow made sure of it. The girl's voice cracked. You shouldn't have. I didn't have much choice. You could have left. Emma's eyes were bright with tears, or fear, or both. You still could. Tonight, during the card game, while everyone's distracted, I can't. Why not?
This story
I came
was
out almost
posted on the
angry.
channel west
What's
of
here
Betrayal.
worth dying for?
Please do not
Lydia
repost
studied
it
the
in any
girl,
form.
saw the terror barely contained beneath her surface. How old are you, Emma? 14. Why? When did you come here? 3 years ago. My parents died and Mrs. Crow took me in. Said she was being charitable. Emma's laugh was bitter. I thought I was lucky. What changed your mind? Emma's hands clenched in her apron. I saw things, heard things, the way they talked about Miss Catherine after... She stopped, swallowed hard. She was kind to me, asked my name, actually listened when I answered. Nobody here does that. And then she was gone, and they said it was an accident, but I heard Mrs. Crow and Mr. Chambers talking, heard them say she'd been... The girl's voice dropped to almost nothing. They said she'd been handled. The word hung in the air like poison gas. Emma, if you know something about what happened to Catherine, I don't know anything. The girl backed toward the door, fear winning whatever brief courage had brought her here. I just serve tea and keep my head down and try not to end up in the ravine too. Wait. But Emma was already gone, the door clicking shut behind her. Lydia sat with the untouched tea. Emma's words echoing. Handled. Like Catherine had been a problem that needed solving, a mess that needed cleaning. The casual cruelty of it made her feel sick. She thought about Adrian's plan, about sneaking into Constance's study while a room full of men played cards 1 floor below. Thought about what would happen if she was caught. Constance wouldn't kill her immediately, probably. There were guests in the house, witnesses, but after they left, in the dark hours before dawn, who would hear her scream? The smart thing would be to run. Take Emma's advice, slip out during the card game, make it to that freight train Adrian had mentioned, get back to Philadelphia alive if poor. But Catherine's unfinished letter kept playing in her mind. 3 women in 10 years, all accidents, all brides who asked too many questions. If Lydia ran, someone else would eventually take her place. Another desperate woman answering an advertisement, walking into this beautiful trap. The cycle would continue until someone broke it. Dinner was tense and formal, Constance presiding over conversation that felt like verbal fencing. She asked pointed questions about Lydia's education, her family background, her expectations for married life. Each answer was weighed, measured, found wanting in ways Constance didn't bother to hide. Your mother died when you were young, I understand, Constance said over dessert. 10. Yes. And your father? Never knew him. How unfortunate. Constance's tone suggested she thought it was more shameful than unfortunate. So you were raised in an orphanage? Until I was old enough to work. How industrious. The word dripped condescension. And what sort of education did this orphanage provide? Reading, writing, basic mathematics, enough to keep books or write letters. But no refinement, no music, no languages, no appreciation for culture. Lydia met her eyes steadily. I learned what I needed to survive. Survival. Constance smiled that terrible smile again. How primitive. Here, we concern ourselves with rather more than mere survival. Adrian's fork scraped against his plate, the sound sharp in the tension. I think Lydia's education is perfectly adequate for... I wasn't asking your opinion, Adrian. Constance didn't even look at him. I'm simply ensuring Miss Hale understands what will be expected of her as a member of this family. We have standards to maintain, a reputation. We cannot afford mistakes. The way she said mistakes made it clear she was talking about more than social gaffes. Lydia forced herself to take a bite of dessert, to play the cowed bride. Every instinct screamed to challenge Constance, to push back against the casual cruelty, but Adrian's warning held her tongue. Don't challenge her. Act meek. Wait. At 7:30, the guests began arriving. Lydia watched from the second-floor landing as men in expensive suits were shown into the drawing room. She recognized the sheriff from his badge, a big man with a face like weathered leather and eyes that saw too much. The others were ranchers or businessmen, the kind of people who shape territorial politics over cigars and whiskey. Constance greeted them like a queen receiving subjects, all charm and calculated grace. Harold was there too, playing host, offering drinks and false laughter. Adrian found Lydia in the shadows. They'll play until midnight at least. Constance never lets the game end early, bad for business relationships. He pressed something into her hand. A key. This opens her study door. The desk will be locked separately. You'll need to pick it. I don't know how to pick locks. There are tools in the library. Third shelf, behind the medical texts. A leather roll with thin metal instruments. He paused. Catherine taught me. Said every woman should know how to open doors men tried to keep closed. Lydia closed her fist around the key. If this goes wrong, it won't. But if it does, then I'll create a distraction, get you out however I can. Adrian's eyes were hard. But it won't come to that. Constance is too invested in maintaining appearances in front of her guests. She won't risk a scene. He left her there, descended to join the card game, and Lydia was alone with her fear and a key that felt like it weighed 10 pounds. She waited another 30 minutes, listening to male laughter drift up from below. Waited until the sound settled into the rhythm of men deep in cards and drink, attention focused elsewhere. Then she moved. The third floor was forbidden territory. She knew that without being told, the way Constance had described it as her private domain, the way servants avoided even looking at the staircase that led up. Lydia climbed it anyway, each step deliberate, testing for creaks. The study door was dark wood, heavy, imposing. Lydia slid the key into the lock with hands that shook. The mechanism turned smoothly, too smoothly, like it was well used. She slipped inside, closed the door behind her, and stood in darkness that smelled like old paper and something sharper. Metal, maybe? Or blood, though that might have been her imagination running wild. She lit the lamp on the desk, keeping it low. The room sprang into shadow-draped view. More books, a massive desk, filing cabinets along one wall, and portraits, dozens of them, covering every available space. Men in frontier clothes, women in severe dresses, all of them looking down with the same cold certainty. The Crow family tree, staring at her like they knew she didn't belong. Lydia forced herself to focus. She tried the desk drawers, locked, as Adrian had warned. She'd need the picks from the library, which meant going back down, getting them, coming back up. More chances to be seen, to be caught, or she could search the filing cabinets first. They were unlocked. Careless, or maybe Constance simply didn't expect anyone to have the nerve to come up here. Lydia opened the first drawer, found it organized with obsessive precision. Files labeled by year, by subject, by some classification system that probably made sense to Constance. She started with 1872. The files were dense, legal documents, land deeds, contracts. She pulled one at random, scanned it. A deed transfer from someone named Marcus Sullivan to Jonathan Crow, Adrian's grandfather. Signed, notarized, dated March 1872. Nothing obviously suspicious. She tried another. Samuel Chen transferring 30 acres to Jonathan Crow. Dated June 1872. A third. Robert Mackenzie, 160 acres. October 1872. On the surface, they looked legitimate, but something nagged at her. She pulled the Mackenzie deed again, studied it closer. The signature looked wrong, too smooth, too perfect, like someone had practiced writing it. She found a magnifying glass on the desk, examined the signature under lamplight. There, a slight tremor in one letter, like the hand had hesitated. And the ink was different from the rest of the document, just barely. Darker, newer, forged. Lydia's heart kicked up. She pulled more deeds, checking signatures, comparing ink. Not all of them were forged, but enough were. Maybe a third of the transfers showed signs of tampering, but this wasn't enough. She needed proof of violence, of the murders Catherine had referenced. The burned cabin, the disappeared families, paper trails that connected the Crows directly to... A sound from the hallway froze her blood. Footsteps. Coming up the stairs. Lydia doused the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. Her eyes hadn't adjusted. She couldn't see, could barely breathe. She felt her way toward what she hoped was a corner, trying to be silent, trying not to knock into furniture. The footsteps stopped outside the door. The handle turned. Lydia pressed herself against the wall, squeezing into the space between a filing cabinet and the corner. Her pulse hammered so loud she was sure whoever was coming in would hear it. The door opened. Lamplight spilled in from the hallway. "I know you're in here," Constance's voice, cold and certain.
This story was
Lydia held
posted
her
on the
breath,
channel
didn't
west
move,
of
prayed
Betrayal.
the shadows were
Please
deep
do not
enough.
repost it in any
Constance stepped
form.
into the room, holding the lamp high. Her shadow stretched across the floor like something alive, reaching. "You can come out now, or I can have the sheriff come up and drag you out. Your choice." Nothing. Silence that felt like suffocation. "Very well." Constance moved to the desk, set down the lamp. "I should have known you'd try something like this. You have that look about you, the same look Catherine had. That spark of defiance you people mistake for courage." She opened a drawer, apparently she had a key the whole time, and pulled out a folder. "Did you find what you were looking for? Did you discover our terrible secrets?" Her laugh was dry. "Let me save you some time." Constance opened the folder, spread papers across the desk. "Yes, the land deeds were forged. Yes, we used violence when necessary. Yes, people died. The territory was being built, and building requires sacrifice." She ran a finger along one document. "My father understood that. He did what needed to be done, and we prospered. That's how civilizations are made, not through gentle handshakes and fair dealing, but through the will to do what others won't." Lydia's fingernails dug into her palms. Every instinct screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. The only exit was past Constance. "And Catherine?" Constance continued, talking to the room like she was having a conversation. "She was a problem, a persistent, self-righteous problem who thought she could bring down a family that had survived worse than one meddling bride. So we handled it. There it was, confession, clear and cold. The question now," Constance said, turning slowly, her eyes scanning the shadows, "is what to do about you." Lydia's hand found something next to her, a poker by a small fireplace she hadn't noticed. Heavy, iron, real. She closed her fingers around it. "You signed the contract," Constance went on, "which means legally, anything you discovered here is ours. You cannot testify, cannot share what you've learned. The agreement is binding, so even if you somehow escape this room, this house, you have no legal standing, no recourse." She smiled, though escape does seem unlikely at the moment. Footsteps in the hallway. Multiple sets. Men's voices. "Mrs. Crow? Is everything all right?" The sheriff. "Fine, Thomas, just retrieving some papers for our game." Constance raised her voice slightly. "Though you might want to wait there, we seem to have a rat problem." Lydia broke from the shadows, swinging the poker. Constance dodged, faster than someone her age should move, and the iron missed her head by inches, slamming into the desk instead. Wood splintered. "Here!" Constance shouted. The sheriff burst through the door, saw Lydia with the poker, and his hand went to his gun. "Drop it," he ordered. Lydia looked at the poker, at the sheriff's drawn weapon, at Constance's triumphant face. She dropped it. The clang echoed like a death knell. "Well," Constance said, straightening her dress, "caught in the act. Breaking and entering, attempted assault. I believe that's sufficient grounds for arrest, don't you think, Thomas?" The sheriff looked uncomfortable but nodded. "You want to press charges?" "Not charges, confinement." Constance moved closer to Lydia, unafraid now that armed men filled the doorway. "Clearly Miss Hale is unstable. The stress of the upcoming wedding, perhaps. She needs to be kept somewhere safe, for her own protection." "No." Lydia's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm not unstable. I'm trying to expose what you did, what you all did." "What I did?" Constance's eyebrows rose. "And what exactly is that?" "Murdered Catherine Winters, forged land deeds, killed families who wouldn't sell their..." "Do you have proof?" Constance cut her off. "Any physical evidence, or just the hysterical accusations of a common tavern girl who broke into my private study and attacked me with a weapon?" Lydia's mouth opened, closed. The deeds were on the desk, but so what? Without expert examination, without someone to testify they were forged, they were just papers. And she'd signed a contract that prevented her from sharing anything she learned here. She'd walked right into the trap. "That's what I thought." Constance turned to the sheriff. "Thomas, be a dear and escort Miss Hale to the East Wing bedroom. Lock her in. I'll decide what to do with her in the morning. Ma'am, I'm not sure. You're being paid well enough not to be sure. Constance's voice went hard. Do it. Now. The sheriff grabbed Lydia's arm, not gently. Another man, one of the ranchers, took her other side. They marched her out of the study, down the hallway, to a room she'd never seen before. Small. Window barred. A bed. A chamber pot. Nothing else. They shoved her inside. The door locked behind her with a sound like finality. Lydia stood in the center of the room, shaking with rage and fear, and something else she couldn't name. She'd failed. Completely, utterly failed. Found evidence but couldn't use it, confronted Constance but had no proof, tried to fight but was outmaneuvered at every turn. Catherine had died trying to expose these people, and Lydia was going to die having accomplished nothing. She moved to the window, tested the bars. Solid, unyielding. The drop outside was 2 stories onto stone courtyard. Even if she got through the bars, the fall would break bones. Voices drifted up from outside. The card game guests leaving, calling goodbyes, horses trotting away into the night. The house settling back into its usual silence. Then footsteps in the hallway outside her door. A key turned. Adrian slipped in, closed the door quickly behind him. His face was white. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No, just locked in." "I know, I'm sorry. I didn't think she'd leave the game, didn't think—" He ran both hands through his hair. "We have to get you out. Tonight." "She has the sheriff on her side, half the territory from the looks of things." "I know." Adrian paced the small room like a caged animal. "But there's someone else. Someone who might help." "Who?" "A railroad investigator arrived in Prospect this afternoon. Robert Thorne. The one I told you about." Adrian's eyes were wild with desperate hope. "He's staying at the hotel. If we can get you to him, get you somewhere safe, we can still—" "Adrian, I signed that contract. I can't testify about anything I found here." "Screw the contract. It's fraud, signed under duress. Any decent lawyer would tear it apart." He grabbed her shoulders. "But you have to be alive to fight it. And if you stay here—" He didn't finish. Didn't need to. "How do we get out?" Lydia asked. "There's a service entrance at the back of the house. If we can reach it without being seen, there's a path through the woods that comes out near the road." He pulled out a pocket watch, checked it. "The stable hand changes at 2 a.m. That's our window. What about you?" "If you help me escape, I'll deal with that." Adrian's jaw set. "I've been dealing with Constance my whole life. I can handle one more confrontation. She'll destroy you. She'll try." Something fierce flickered in his eyes. "But I'm done being her puppet. Done letting her use the family name to justify murder." He moved to the door, listened. "Get ready. When I come back, we run fast and we don't stop." He left her there, locked the door again from the outside so it would look undisturbed. Lydia stood in the dark room, watching the clock on the mantel tick toward 2 a.m. Her whole body felt wound tight, ready to snap. She thought about Catherine, about Emma, about all the women who'd passed through this house, and either escaped or didn't. She thought about the Mackenzie family, burned alive, about forged deeds and stolen land and a legacy built on blood. And she thought about Robert Thorne, potentially sleeping peacefully in a hotel 4 miles away, unaware that evidence of one of the territory's biggest fraud cases was trapped in a locked room, waiting for a chance to run. The clock struck 2. Footsteps approached. The lock turned. Adrian stood there, breathing hard. Now! They moved through the dark house like thieves, which Lydia supposed they were, stealing away with knowledge that wasn't supposed to leave, running from justice that had been bought and paid for. The service entrance was unguarded. They slipped into cold night air, into darkness broken only by starlight. The path Adrian had mentioned was barely visible, just a thin line through the trees. They ran, branches whipped at Lydia's face, her dress catching on undergrowth, her breath coming in gasps. Behind them, the house sat silent and dark, but she imagined she could feel Constance waking, realizing what had happened, sending men after them. The path seemed endless. Then suddenly they broke onto a road, rutted dirt pale in the moonlight. "This way!" Adrian gasped, pulling her left. "Town is 3 miles." They ran until Lydia's lungs burned, until her legs trembled, until the first gray light of dawn started bleeding into the eastern sky. And then they saw it. Prospect, small and dark, and potentially their only chance at survival. The hotel was a two-story building on the main street, windows dark
This story
except
was
for one
posted on the
second
channel
floor,
west of
a lamp
Betrayal.
burning despite
Please
the
do
hour.
not repost it
Adrian
in any
pounded
form.
on the front door. No answer. He pounded again, harder. A window opened above. A man's head appeared, gray hair wild with sleep. "What the hell? Robert Thorne?" Adrian called up. The man's expression changed, went from angry to alert. "Who's asking?" "Adrian Crow. And this is Lydia Hale. We have evidence of territorial land fraud, murder, and corruption. And about 2 hours before the people responsible catch up with us." Thorne stared down at them for a long moment, then, "Doors unlocked. Get inside." They stumbled into the hotel lobby, breathing hard, Lydia's dress torn and muddy from the run through the woods. The space was small, shabby, in a way that spoke of years of minimal upkeep. A clerk dozed behind the front desk, jerking awake at their entrance. Robert Thorne descended the stairs in a dressing gown thrown over trousers, his feet bare. Up close, he looked older than his voice had suggested, maybe 60, with lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth, lines that came from seeing too much and trusting too little. "Upstairs," he said without preamble. "Room 7. Move." They climbed, Lydia's legs shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline crash. Thorne's room was spartanly furnished. A bed, a desk buried under papers, a trunk in the corner. He locked the door behind them, moved to the window, checked the street. "How long before they come looking?" he asked. "Hard to say." Adrian collapsed into the room's single chair. "Constance might not realize we're gone until morning, or she might have noticed immediately. And if she knows you're here, then we have maybe an hour before the sheriff shows up with a story about escaped criminals or dangerous lunatics." Thorne grunted, still watching the street. "Tell me what you have. Fast." Adrian looked at Lydia. She pulled herself together, forced her mind to work through the fear. "Forged land deeds. At least a dozen, maybe more. Transfers from homesteaders to Jonathan Crow between 1872 and 1875. The signatures are fake. I could see it under magnification." "You have the deeds?" "No, they're in Constance Crow's study." Thorne's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes dimmed. "So you have testimony about documents you can't produce?" "There's more," Adrian cut in. "Catherine Winters was investigating the family. She found evidence connecting them to multiple deaths, families who refused to sell, who fought the land grabs. She was building a case before she died." "Died how?" "They said it was an accident. Fall from a horse. Broken neck." Adrian's hands clenched. "But she was killed. We know it." "You know it, or you can prove it?" The question hung in the air like smoke. "We know it," Lydia admitted quietly. "Constance basically confessed tonight, said Catherine was a problem that had been handled." Basically confessed. Thorne turned from the window, and his face was tired. "Let me tell you how this works. I've been investigating railroad corruption for 7 years. You know how many convictions I've secured? 2, out of maybe 50 cases with evidence stronger than what you're describing." He moved to the desk, rifled through papers. "The territorial system is bought and paid for. Judges, sheriffs, land office clerks, all of them tied to the same families they're supposed to be investigating. Without physical evidence, without witnesses willing to testify in court, without documentation that can survive legal challenge." He stopped. "You have none of that. So you won't help us." Lydia heard the defeat in her own voice. "I didn't say that." Thorne pulled out a folder, opened it. Inside were photographs, old and grainy, burned buildings, mass graves. "The Crow family isn't the only one using violence to consolidate land. It's happening across the territory, but they're one of the biggest, one of the most connected. If I could take them down, really take them down, it might break the whole system." "Then what do we need?" Adrian asked. "Everything you don't have." Thorne spread the photographs across the desk. "Deeds I can examine personally, witnesses to the violence, financial records showing payments to hired guns, something concrete that ties the family directly to specific crimes." He looked up. "And we need it fast. Once Constance knows you're here, she'll have every document you saw destroyed within hours." "The study," Lydia said. Everything's in the study. If we could get back in, you can't. Adrian's voice was flat. She'll have it guarded now, locked down. Then we find another way. Thorne started pacing, his legal mind visibly working. Who else knows about this? Who else in that house might have information? Harold Chambers, the family lawyer, but he's as dirty as they are. Servants? Lydia thought of Emma, terrified and 14. Maybe there's a girl, a maid. She knew Catherine, knows something about what happened, but she's scared. Get her to talk. How? I can't exactly walk back into that house and ask her to betray her employer. No, but I can get a federal warrant for the girl's testimony. If she's compelled by law, Thorne was already pulling out paper, writing. It'll take time to get a judge's signature, but if she saw something, heard something, well, she's a child, Lydia interrupted. You want to put a 14-year-old in the middle of this? I want to put murderers in prison. Thorne didn't look up from his writing. Sometimes that requires uncomfortable choices. A knock at the door froze them all. Thorne moved to the window again, looked down. Sheriff's outside, 2 deputies with him. He turned to Adrian. They looking for you? Probably. Another knock, harder. Mr. Thorne? Sheriff Bailey, need a word. Thorne pointed to the trunk in the corner. Both of you. In there. Don't make a sound. It was cramped and dark inside the trunk. Lydia pressed against Adrian's chest, barely able to breathe. She heard Thorne cross the room, open the door. Sheriff, early for a social call. Nothing social about it. Bailey's voice was rough, unfriendly. You got 2 fugitives in here? Fugitives from what? Adrian Crow and a woman named Lydia Hale. She broke into Mrs. Crow's private study, attacked her with a weapon. He helped her escape. That's quite a story. Thorne's voice was mild. You have warrants? Don't need warrants for people caught in the commission of a crime. Actually, you do. Territorial law requires, I know what the law requires. Bailey sounded like he was speaking through gritted teeth. Are they here or not? I'm alone, as you can see. Footsteps crossing the room. Lydia held her breath, feeling Adrian's heart pound against her back. The trunk lid rattled but held. Thorne must have locked it. You sure about that? Bailey asked. You questioning my word, Sheriff? A pause. Then, Mrs. Crow's a powerful woman. Makes powerful enemies when crossed. You understand what I'm saying? I understand you're making threats in my hotel room at 4 a.m. without proper authority. Just offering friendly advice. Bailey's footsteps retreated. You see these 2, you let me know. Immediately. Clear? Transparent. The door closed. Footsteps descended. Silence stretched until Lydia thought her lungs would burst. Then finally Thorne opened the trunk. They climbed out, gasping. Adrian moved to the window, watched the sheriff and his men mount their horses and ride off. They'll be back, Thorne said, with actual warrants, probably fabricated charges. We have maybe 4 hours before this room gets searched legally. He looked at them both. So we need a new plan. Such as? Lydia asked. We go on the offensive. Thorne was already gathering papers, shoving them into a leather case. If they're destroying evidence, we force them to create more. If they're silencing witnesses, we make noise they can't ignore. We turn this into something too public to bury. How? Railroad Commission meets in Helena next week. Big meeting, territorial governor will be there, federal representatives, newspaper reporters. If we can present evidence there, in front of that audience, Thorne snapped the case shut. Constance can buy a local sheriff, but she can't buy everyone, not if we do this right. We still don't have evidence, Adrian pointed out. Then we manufacture pressure until someone cracks. Thorne looked at Lydia. That contract you signed. You have a copy? Harold kept all the copies. Figures. But you remember what it said? Every word. The clauses were burned into her memory. Why? Because fraudulent contracts are evidence of conspiracy. If we can prove you were coerced into signing away your legal rights, that's witness tampering. Add it to the land fraud, and suddenly we have a pattern of criminal behavior. Thorne started pacing again, his mind clearly racing ahead. We need to document everything, your testimony, Adrian's knowledge of the family history, anything Catherine left behind before she died. Catherine's belongings were cleared out, Adrian said. I looked. Nothing remained. People always miss something. Thorne fixed him with a hard stare. Think.
This story was
Where would
posted
she
on the
hide
channel
evidence
west
if
of
she knew her
Betrayal.
time was running
Please
out?
do not repost it
Adrian's
in any
face went
form.
distant, remembering. She used to ride. Early mornings, before anyone else was awake, said it was the only time she felt free. His eyes widened. The stable. She spent time there helping with the horses. If she hid something, can you get back in? The estate? After running away, they'd shoot me on sight. Not if you go officially. Thorne pulled out more paper, started writing rapidly. I'm deputizing you as a federal investigator. Temporary authority, but legal. You go back, you demand access to conduct an investigation. With witnesses present, they can't refuse without looking guilty. They'll still refuse. Let them. Thorne looked up, and there was something fierce in his expression. We document every refusal, every obstruction. Build a case not just on what they did 30 years ago, but what they're doing right now to cover it up. Lydia watched this plan take shape, feeling something shift in her chest. They were fighting back. Actually fighting back, not running, not hiding. What about me? You stay hidden. Thorne handed the paper to Adrian. Once they realize they can't find you, Constance will get desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. We wait for hers. I'm not hiding while Adrian walks back into that house. You're a target, Thorne said bluntly. The moment they find you, you're either arrested on false charges or you have another convenient accident. I need you alive to testify. Testify to what? I can't produce evidence. I signed a contract that says, contracts signed under duress aren't binding. Any first-year law student knows that. Thorne moved to a cabinet, pulled out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses, poured without asking. But proving duress requires showing pattern of intimidation, threat of violence, unequal bargaining position. You were penniless, alone, facing a family with infinite resources. That's textbook coercion. He handed her a glass. She took it, surprised. Drink. You look like you need it. The whiskey burned going down, but it steadied her. Where do I hide? There's a boarding house on the edge of town. Woman who runs it, Martha Yates, she's testified for me before. Lost her husband to railroad violence 15 years ago. She'll keep you safe, keep her mouth shut. For how long? However long it takes. Thorne downed his own whiskey. Could be days, could be weeks. Depends on how fast we can build the case. And if we can't build it? Thorne didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quiet. Then we get you out of the territory. New name, new life. It's not justice, but it's survival. Lydia looked at Adrian, saw the same conflict in his face. Run and live, or stay and risk everything for a chance at something larger than themselves. We stay, she said. Adrian nodded. We stay. Dawn was breaking when Thorne led Lydia through back alleys to Martha Yates's boarding house. It was a weathered building on the wrong side of the tracks. Windows dark, paint peeling. Thorne knocked in a pattern. 3 quick, 2 slow, 1 quick. The door opened immediately. The woman who answered was maybe 50, gray-haired, with eyes that had seen too much to be shocked by anything. She looked at Lydia's torn dress, her muddy face, and stepped aside without a word. How long? Martha asked Thorne. Don't know yet. She in danger? Considerable. Martha nodded like this was routine. Room 3
This
back of
story
the house.
was posted on the
Window
channel
faces
west
the
of
alley if she
Betrayal.
needs to run.
Please do
I'll
not
bring food up
repost
later.
it in any form.
Martha, Thorne started. I know. I don't know her, haven't seen her. Wouldn't recognize her if I passed her on the street. Martha's voice was flat. How many times we doing this dance, Robert? Hopefully the last. The room Martha led her to was small but clean. A bed, a washstand, a window with a view of the alley and the mountains beyond. Lydia sat on the bed, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. She'd been awake for nearly 24 hours, had run through the woods, hidden in a trunk, and committed to a plan that might get her killed. Get some sleep, Martha said from the doorway. You look half dead. I feel it. I'll wake you if anything happens. Martha paused. For what it's worth, whatever you're doing, whoever you're fighting, I hope you win. Then she was gone, and Lydia was alone. She managed to wash her face, to to remove the torn dress and collapse onto the bed in her chemise. Sleep should have been impossible, but exhaustion dragged her down into darkness. She woke to voices downstairs. Afternoon light slanted through the window, painting the shabby room in shades of gold. The voices were raised, angry. Lydia crept to the door, opened it a crack. "Federal authority or not, I won't have you harboring criminals in my town." Sheriff Bailey's voice louder now. "Show me a warrant." Martha, unmoved. "Real one, signed by a real judge, not something Harold Chambers scribbled on Crow stationery." "You're making a mistake, Martha." "Wouldn't be my first." Footsteps on the stairs. Lydia eased the door shut, looked around the room for anything that could be used as a weapon. The washstand pitcher was heavy ceramic. She grabbed it, positioned herself behind the door. The footsteps passed her room, kept going, descended again. "She's not here," Bailey said, and he sounded frustrated. "Told you she wasn't." "If I find out you're lying, then what? You'll arrest me? On what charge? Being unhelpful to corrupt lawmen?" Martha's laugh was bitter. "Get out of my house, Thomas, and tell Constance Crow she can go to hell." The front door slammed. Lydia waited, listening. Finally, a soft knock at her door. "They're gone," Martha said. "For now." Lydia opened the door. Martha stood there with a tray. Bread, cheese, water. Real food, simple and honest. "Thank you," Lydia said. "Don't thank me yet. You're just getting started." Martha set the tray down. "I knew Catherine, you know, the girl who died. She stayed here a few times when things got bad at the estate. Sweet kid, determined." Her face hardened. "They killed her for caring too much. Don't let them do the same to you." "I'll try." "Trying's not enough. You have to be smarter than they are, meaner when it counts." Martha moved to the window, looked out. "Robert Thorne's a good man, but he plays by rules they ignore. Remember that." After Martha left, Lydia ate mechanically, her mind churning. She thought about Catherine staying in this same house, maybe this same room, gathering evidence, building her case, believing justice would prevail, and then dying in a ravine, alone. Lydia moved to the window, looked out at the mountains. Somewhere out there, Adrian was walking back into the estate, armed with nothing but federal authority and desperate courage. Somewhere, Constance was planning her next move. Somewhere, Emma was serving tea with shaking hands, knowing too much and able to say too little. The pieces were all moving. The question was whether they'd come together into something resembling justice or just more violence and buried secrets. 3 days passed in that room. Martha brought food, news, and warnings. The estate was locked down tight, no one in or out without Constance's permission. Adrian had made his official request to investigate, had been denied, had filed a formal complaint with the territorial marshal. Thorne was working connections in Helena, trying to get the Railroad Commission to bump up their meeting, to create urgency. And Constance was making her own moves. "She's offering a reward," Martha said on the third day, bringing dinner. $500 for information leading to Lydia Hale's whereabouts. Says you're mentally unstable, dangerous. Claims you threatened to burn down the estate. Lydia's laugh was hollow. Of course she does. Half the town believes it. Other half doesn't care as long as the money's real. Martha set down the tray. "You can't stay here much longer. Someone will talk." "Where do I go?" "Thorne's working on it. Might have a safe house in Helena, but the trip's dangerous. Railway stops in 3 towns between here and there. Any of them could have people watching." "So I'm trapped." "Not trapped. Cornered." Martha's smile was grim. Different thing entirely. That night, Lydia lay awake, listening to the boarding house settle. Footsteps in the hall, voices through thin walls, the distant sound of a piano from the saloon down the street. Normal life, continuing around her while she hid like a fugitive. She thought about what Thorne had said. "We need evidence they're covering up crimes happening right now. Documentation of obstruction, intimidation, witness tampering." And suddenly, she knew what they had to do. The next morning, she told Martha to get a message to Thorne. When he arrived that afternoon climbing the back stairs quickly, Lydia had her plan ready. "We go public," she said, "before they're ready, before they can control the narrative." "Public how?" "The town. We call a meeting, present what we know, force people to choose sides.
This story was
Lydia pulled
posted
out
on the
papers
channel
she'd been
west
writing
of
on.
Betrayal.
3 days of
Please
ideas
do not
compressed
repost
into
it
something
in any
resembling
form.
a strategy. Constance controls the sheriff, the lawyer, the businessman. But she doesn't control everyone. There are people in this town who lost land to the crows, who remember the violence. If we can reach them, she'll have you arrested the moment you show your face. Not if we do it smart. Lydia met his eyes. What if I turn myself in? Publicly, in front of witnesses. Demand a trial. Demand the right to defend myself in open court. Thorne stared at her. That's insane. That's our only option. Right now, I'm a rumor, a story Constance can twist however she wants. But if I stand in front of the whole town and tell the truth, they won't believe you. Not against her. Maybe not all of them, but some will. Enough to create doubt. Lydia leaned forward. And doubt is all we need. Once people start questioning, once the facade cracks, it could also get you killed. I'm dead anyway if this doesn't work. Lydia's voice was steady. At least this way I go down fighting. Thorne looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded. I'll need 2 days to prepare. Line up witnesses, file the right motions. Make sure this happens in a courtroom, not a jail cell. What about Adrian? He's our ace, the family heir turning against them. If he testifies, they'll destroy him. Probably. Thorne's face was hard, but he knew that when he chose this path. We all did. He left to make arrangements, and Lydia sat in the small room feeling the weight of what she'd just set in motion. In 2 days, she'd walk back into town, into the heart of Constance's power, and bet her life that truth mattered more than money. It was a bad bet. She knew that. But it was the only one they had. The night before, Martha brought her a dress, simple, dark, respectable. You'll want to look like someone worth believing, she said. Lydia held the fabric, feeling its weight. What if this doesn't work? Then you'll have tried. Martha's hand rested briefly on her shoulder. That's more than most people can say. Morning came too fast. Thorne arrived with Adrian, both of them grim-faced. The three of them stood in the small room, planning the last details. The arraignment is set for 10, Thorne said. Courthouse steps. Public hearing. I've made sure word got out. There'll be a crowd. Constance will be there, Adrian added. She wouldn't miss this. Good. Lydia's voice was steadier than she felt. Let her watch. They left the boarding house through the back door, moving through alleys to avoid early risers. The courthouse was a 2-story stone building at the center of town, imposing and official. Already, people were gathering. Curiosity, mostly, drawn by the promise of drama. Lydia saw the moment Constance arrived. Black carriage, matching horses, the woman herself descending like a queen granting audience, Harold Chambers beside her, briefcase in hand, the sheriff and his deputies forming a protective circle, and standing at the edge of the crowd, almost hidden, Emma. The girl's face was white, her eyes wide. Thorne led Lydia up the courthouse steps. The crowd noise dimmed, then rose again in a wave of whispers. Lydia kept her spine straight, her eyes forward, refused to let them see fear. Sheriff Bailey moved to intercept. Lydia Hale, you're under arrest for... I'm surrendering voluntarily, Lydia cut him off. For a public hearing on charges of breaking and entering an assault. I demand the right to defend myself in open court, with witnesses present. Bailey looked at Constance.
This story was posted
She
on the
nodded
channel
slightly.
west of Betrayal.
Fine, Bailey
Please
said.
do not repost
But you're in
it
custody
any
until the
form.
judge rules. That's acceptable. He cuffed her hands in front, the metal cold and tight. Led her into the courthouse, the crowd pressing in, everyone wanting to see, to hear, to be part of whatever was about to happen. The courtroom was small, wooden benches packed with people. The judge, a tired-looking man in his 60s, sat behind a raised desk, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. This is highly irregular, he said. Federal investigator Robert Thorne, Your Honor. My client is surrendering voluntarily and requesting immediate arraignment with full rights to defense. The judge sighed. Very well. Charges? Bailey stood. Breaking and entering, assault with a deadly weapon, destruction of private property. I'd like to address those charges, Lydia said. The judge looked surprised. You're representing yourself. I am. That's inadvisable, miss. Hale. Lydia Hale. And I understand it's inadvisable, but I'm doing it anyway. She turned to face the packed courtroom, seeing faces she recognized from the train station, from town, seeing Constance in the front row, perfectly composed. I'm accused of breaking into Constance Crow's study. That's true. I did. Want to know why? Miss Hale, the judge started, because I found evidence of fraud, land fraud specifically, forged deeds transferring property from homesteaders to the Crow family during the railroad expansion. I also found evidence suggesting multiple murders connected to those land grabs. The courtroom exploded, voices raised, people standing, the judge hammering his gavel. Order! I will have order! Constance stood smoothly. Good. Your Honor, these are the delusions of an unstable woman. I have documentation of Miss Hale's. Do you have the deeds? Lydia's voice cut across the noise. The ones from your study? Can you produce them here? Let experts examine them? I don't have to produce anything. You're the one on trial. Then let's make it a real trial. Let's examine the evidence. Let's talk about Catherine Winters, who died investigating your family. Let's talk about the Mackenzie homestead, burned to the ground with a family of 5 inside. Lydia's voice rose. Let's talk about every family you displaced, every life you destroyed building your fortune on blood and lies. The courtroom was chaos now, everyone shouting. The judge had given up with his gavel, and then Adrian stood. She's telling the truth, he said, and his voice somehow carried over the noise. Everything she said. My family built their wealth through violence and fraud. I have proof. Every eye turned to him. Constance's face went white, then red. Adrian, she started, I have Catherine Winters' original investigative notes. He held up a leather journal. Found them yesterday in the stable, exactly where Lydia thought they'd be. Detailed documentation of 18 murders, 47 cases of deed fraud, bribes paid to territorial officials. He looked at Constance, including payments to this judge, the sheriff, and most of the men in this courtroom. The silence was absolute. Then everyone started talking at once. The judge's gavel came down like a gunshot, over and over, but the sound was swallowed by the roar of voices filling the courtroom. Men were on their feet, shouting accusations or denials. Women clutched their neighbors, eyes wide. The sheriff's hand went to his gun, then away, then back, like he couldn't decide whether to shoot someone or run. Constance remained perfectly still in the front row, a statue carved from ice and fury. But her hands, Lydia could see them from where she stood, still in handcuffs, her hands were shaking. Your Honor, Thorne's voice cut through the chaos. I move to submit this journal as evidence and request immediate federal oversight of these proceedings. The judge looked like a man watching his world collapse. His face had gone gray, sweat beading on his forehead despite the morning chill. I can't what? Adrian stepped forward, holding the journal high. Can't allow evidence in your own courtroom? Can't permit testimony about crimes you might be implicated in? He opened the journal, began reading. March 15th, 1873. Payment of $200 to Judge William Hastings for favorable ruling in Crow land dispute. June 3rd, 1873. Additional payment of... That's enough! The judge stood, his chair scraping backward. I'm calling a recess. Everyone out. Now. Like hell. The voice came from the back of the courtroom. A man stood, weathered face, missing 2 fingers on his left hand, eyes hard as flint. My family had land taken by the Crows in '74. Been waiting 20 years to hear someone admit what really happened. Mine too. An older woman, her voice shaking. My husband tried to fight the deed. They found him dead in his barn 3 days later. Called it suicide. More voices joined. A chorus of grievances kept silent for decades. The courtroom had become a confessional, years of fear and anger finally finding voice. Constance stood. The movement was slight, but somehow it commanded attention. The voices died down. This is theater, she said, and her voice was steady, controlled. A desperate woman facing criminal charges, spinning fantasies to save herself. A disloyal nephew who's been unstable since his mother's unfortunate passing. And a federal investigator who's built a career on failed prosecutions and conspiracy theories. She looked directly at Lydia. You have no proof, no evidence that will survive legal scrutiny, just stories and a journal that could have been written yesterday. The ink is 20 years old, Thorne said. Forensic analysis will prove it. Then test it. Take your time. Meanwhile, Miss Hale remains in custody, charged with crimes she committed 2 nights ago. Constance's smile was razor thin. Unless you have evidence of those specific crimes being fabricated. Thorne's jaw tightened. Your Honor, I request denied. The judge had found his spine, or at least remembered who paid him. Miss Hale will be held pending trial. The journal will be examined, but until its authenticity is verified, these proceedings are suspended. This is obstruction of justice, Thorne said. This is proper legal procedure. The judge nodded to Bailey. Sheriff, take Miss Hale into custody. Bailey moved forward, but Adrian stepped between them. No. Boy, you don't want to do this, Bailey warned. Probably not. Adrian's voice was quiet, dangerous. But I'm doing it anyway. You want to arrest her, you go through me first. The sheriff's hand moved to his gun. The courtroom held its breath. Then Emma's voice cut through the tension, small but clear. I saw them. Every head turned. The girl stood in the doorway, white-faced and trembling, but her voice didn't waver. I saw them the night Miss Catherine died, Mrs. Crow and Mr. Chambers. They went to her room after everyone was asleep. I was cleaning the hallway, and I heard them arguing with her. Heard Miss Catherine say she was leaving in the morning, that she had enough evidence to destroy them all. Emma, be quiet, Constance's voice cracked like a whip. No. The girl's hands were shaking, but she kept talking. I heard Mr. Chambers say they couldn't let her leave. Heard Mrs. Crow say... Her voice broke, then steadied. Heard her say accidents happen to people who don't know their place. The fantasies of a simple-minded child, Constance said, but something had shifted in her face. The control was slipping. I'm not simple. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she stood straighter. And I know what I heard. They left her room at midnight. By morning, Miss Catherine was dead at the bottom of the ravine. She looked at Lydia. I tried to warn you, tried to tell you to run before they did the same thing. Emma, you're dismissed. Constance moved toward the girl. Leave. Now. She stays. Thorne blocked Constance's path. Your Honor, this is witness testimony to murder. I demand this girl be placed in protective custody and her statement be entered into record. The judge looked between them, a man trying to calculate which way the wind was blowing. The courtroom was silent now, everyone waiting. Then Harold Chambers stood, his round face slick with sweat. Perhaps we could discuss this privately. Reach some accommodation. Accommodation? Adrian turned on him. You mean a bribe? Another payment to make this disappear? I mean a reasonable settlement, Harold stammered. Miss Hale could be compensated for her distress. Charges dropped, a financial arrangement made. Everyone walks away satisfied. Everyone except the families you murdered, Lydia said. Her voice was steady despite the handcuffs, despite everything. Everyone except Catherine. Everyone except the people whose land you stole and whose lives you destroyed building your empire. Those people are dead. Constance's mask had cracked, revealing something cold and terrible underneath. Dead and gone and forgotten. The territory has moved forward. We built something lasting, something that matters. You built it on bodies.
This story was
Everything is
posted
built
on
on
the channel
bodies.
west of Betrayal.
Constance's control
Please do
shattered.
not repost it
You
in any
think this
form.
territory was settled with handshakes and friendly agreements? It was blood and violence from the start. We just had the strength to take what we wanted and the intelligence to make it legal afterward. She looked around the courtroom at the shocked faces. You all benefited. Every store owner, every farmer, every person who rode the railroad or used the roads or lived in peace because we pacified the land. You want to condemn us? Fine, but don't pretend your hands are clean. The silence that followed was absolute. Then the man with the missing fingers spoke again. My hands aren't clean, but they're not covered in my neighbor's blood either. There's a difference. Is there? Constance laughed, and it was a broken sound. Tell me, how many of you would have done differently? How many of you would have turned down the opportunity for wealth, for power, for a legacy that would outlast you? She looked at Adrian. Even you. You lived in luxury built on those same foundations, ate food bought with that money, wore clothes, received education. Where was your conscience then? Adrian's face was pale. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. There's a difference. Constance turned to the judge. This farce has gone on long enough. These charges are baseless. This girl is a criminal, and I demand— You demand? The judge's voice had changed, something in it hardening. You've been demanding things from me for 20 years, Constance. I'm tired of it. Everyone stared. The judge looked at his hands, at the bench, at anything but Constance's face. I took your money, he said quietly. I made rulings that favored your interests. I looked the other way when evidence disappeared, when witnesses recanted. I told myself it was just business, just politics, just the way things worked. He finally met her eyes. But that girl died. That Catherine Winters. And I knew. I knew it wasn't an accident, and I ruled it one anyway because you paid me to. William, Constance started. I'm done. The judge's hand shook as he gathered papers. Federal investigator Thorne, I'm turning jurisdiction of this case over to you. The territorial marshal will be notified. This courtroom and all its records are now under federal oversight. He looked at Bailey. Sheriff, you're relieved. Deputy Carver will assume temporary authority until a federal marshal arrives. Bailey's face flushed. You can't. I just did. The judge stood. Miss Hale, you're released on your own recognizance pending investigation. Mrs. Crow, Mr. Chambers, consider yourselves under investigation for fraud, murder, conspiracy, and corruption of public officials. He brought the gavel down one final time. This court stands adjourned. Chaos erupted again, but different this time. Not shock, something closer to jubilation. People were talking, crying, embracing. 20 years of silence breaking like a dam. Bailey moved toward the door, but two men blocked his way, deputies who apparently had decided which side they were on. Harold tried to run and made it 3 steps before someone tripped him. He went down hard, papers spilling from his briefcase across the floor. And Constance stood perfectly still in the center of it all, watching her world collapse. Lydia felt the handcuffs come off. Thorne was beside her, and Adrian, and Emma. The girl threw her arms around Lydia's waist, sobbing. You did it, Emma whispered. You actually did it. We did it, Lydia corrected. She looked at Adrian. All of us. But it wasn't over. Lydia could see it in Thorne's face, in the way he was watching Constance. The woman was too calm, too composed. She hadn't built an empire by giving up easily. We need to secure the estate, Thorne said quietly. If she gets back there before we do, every piece of evidence will be destroyed. I'll take you. Adrian was already moving toward the door. I know where everything is hidden. They pushed through the crowd, Lydia staying close to Adrian's back. Outside, the street was filling with people. Word had spread fast. Someone had unhitched Constance's carriage horses, left the vehicle stranded. Symbolic, maybe, or just opportunistic. Thorne had horses waiting. They mounted quickly, started the ride to the estate. Behind them, Lydia could hear more people following, a growing crowd that wanted to see the Crow Empire fall in person. The house looked different in daylight, less imposing, more tired, like a stage set that worked only in careful lighting. Adrian led them through the front door, unlocked, servants apparently having abandoned their posts, and up to Constance's study. The room had been ransacked, files scattered, drawers pulled out, papers torn. Someone had tried to destroy evidence, but there was too much of it. Decades of documentation couldn't be burned in minutes. Thorne started gathering what remained, handling each paper like it was made of gold. We'll need days to catalog all this, weeks maybe. Take whatever you need, Adrian said. He moved to the desk, opened a hidden compartment Lydia hadn't known existed. Inside were ledgers, thick and leather-bound. Financial records, every payment, every bribe, going back 40 years. My grandfather kept meticulous accounts. Why? Lydia asked. Why document your own crimes? Insurance, leverage, if everyone's guilty, no one can turn on you without destroying themselves. Adrian's smile was bitter. It worked until it didn't. They worked for hours, sorting papers, creating piles for different categories of crimes. The crowd outside grew larger, people wanting to see inside the house that had lorded over them for generations. Thorne eventually allowed small groups in, supervised, letting them witness the documentation of their own stolen land. The man with missing fingers found his family's original deed, forged signature clear under examination. He held it with shaking hands, tears running down his weathered face. The woman whose husband had died found correspondence between Jonathan Crow and a hired gun, discussing removing obstacles. The date matched her husband's death within 3 days. More people found more evidence. A mother discovered records of her son's accidental death during a land dispute. A farmer found proof his water rights had been stolen through fabricated legal claims. Each discovery was another crack in the foundation of lies. By evening, the study looked like a hurricane had hit it. Papers everywhere, people sitting on the floor reading documents, crying, raging, finally understanding what had been done to them. And through it all, no sign of Constance. She ran. Thorne stood at the window, watching the sun set over the mountains. Soon as she realized it was over, she disappeared. "We'll find her," Bailey said. The sheriff had shown up an hour ago, no longer in charge but trying to help anyway. Territories being watched, trains, stage lines, main roads. "She won't use main roads," Adrian's voice was distant. "There's a hunting cabin in the mountains. My grandfather used it. Remote, stocked with supplies. If she reached it, then we search." Thorne turned from the window. "We don't stop until she's in custody." But Lydia was thinking about something else. About the way Constance had stood in the courtroom, watching her empire crumble. About the things she'd said, the defiance in her voice. That wasn't a woman planning to run. "She's still here," Lydia said quietly. Everyone looked at her. "Think about it. This house, this estate, it's her whole identity. She spent her entire life building this, protecting it. She wouldn't just abandon it." "Then where is she?" Adrian asked. Lydia thought about the house, about its size, its many rooms, about the servants' quarters, the basement, the tower, she said. "The central tower, where the family portraits are." They found her there, in a room at the top of the tower that Lydia had never seen. It was circular, windows on all sides offering views of the entire estate. And in the center, sitting in a high-backed chair like a throne, was Constance. She had a pistol in her lap. "I wondered when you'd figure it out," she said calmly. "Took longer than I expected." Thorne moved forward slowly, hands visible. "Mrs. Crow, put down the weapon." "Why? So you can arrest me? Parade me through town like a criminal?" Constance's laugh was dry. "I don't think so." "It's over, Aunt Constance." Adrian's voice was gentle. "The evidence is overwhelming. The judge has turned. Even the people you paid are testifying against you." "Of course they are. Rats fleeing a sinking ship." She looked at the gun in her lap, then out the windows at the estate grounds. 40 years I ran this family, protected its interests, made sure we survived." "By killing people," Lydia said. "By doing what was necessary." Constance's eyes were cold. "Your precious Catherine. You know what she was going to do? Destroy everything. Ruin families who'd lived here for generations, throw the entire territorial economy into chaos, all for some abstract idea of justice. As if justice matters when people are starving." "People were starving because of what you did," Thorne said. "Families displaced, livelihoods destroyed,
This
collateral
story
damage,
was posted on the
acceptable
channel
losses."
west of Betrayal.
Constance picked
Please
up the
do not
pistol,
repost it
and
in
everyone
any
tensed.
form.
But she didn't point it at them. She held it loosely, almost carelessly. "You think you've won, think you've brought down the corrupt empire, but you haven't changed anything. Someone else will take our place. Someone always does. The territory runs on blood and money, and it always will." "Maybe," Lydia said, "but at least it won't be running on your blood money." Constance looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. "You're stronger than I thought. Stronger than Catherine was. She broke easily when we—" She stopped. "But you didn't break. Even when I tried to crush you, you kept pushing back. Because some things are worth fighting for. Are they?" Constance stood, moved to the window. "What exactly have you won, Miss Hale? A chance to testify against me? The satisfaction of seeing me hang? And then what? You think the territory will change? That people will suddenly develop consciences?" "I think," Lydia said carefully, that every empire built on lies eventually falls, and every person who stands up makes it fall a little faster. Constance was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled, and it was almost genuine. I suppose that's true. She looked at Adrian. You understand you've destroyed your inheritance? Everything your grandfather built? He built it on murder. I don't want it. Noble. Stupid, but noble. Constance turned back to the window. I won't hang. Won't give you that satisfaction. She raised the pistol. No! Adrian lunged forward, but Thorne caught him. Constance looked back one last time. For what it's worth. I'm not sorry. I did what I thought was right. That's all any of us can do. Then she threw the pistol out the window. It fell 3 stories, bouncing off stone, disappearing into the gardens below. Constance turned to face them, hands empty, posture straight. I'll stand trial, she said. I'll answer for what I've done, but I'll do it on my terms, in my way. Not as a coward who ran, and not as a martyr who died. She held out her hands for handcuffs. Shall we proceed? The trial took 3 months to organize. Federal prosecutors came from Washington, bringing resources and authority that the territorial system couldn't match. They charged Constance with 18 counts of murder, 47 counts of fraud, and dozens more of conspiracy, corruption, and obstruction of justice. Harold Chambers turned witness, testifying to decades of crimes in exchange for a reduced sentence. Judge Hastings resigned in disgrace. Sheriff Bailey was arrested, along with 6 other territorial officials. The trial itself became a spectacle. Newspapers from across the country sent reporters. The courtroom was packed every day, people traveling from across the territory to watch justice, real justice, finally being served. Emma testified, her voice shaking but clear, describing the night Catherine died. Other servants came forward with stories of threats, violence, people who disappeared after crossing the family. The man with missing fingers testified about his brother, beaten to death for refusing to sell. The woman whose husband had died showed the jury letters proving it was murder, not suicide. Adrian testified last, walking the jury through the family's records, explaining how the fraud worked, how the violence was concealed. He looked older when he finished, worn down by the weight of his family's crimes. Lydia watched from the gallery, no longer a defendant but a witness to history. She'd already given her testimony, describing the forged deeds, the confession she'd overheard, the systematic intimidation. The prosecutors had been gentle with her, understanding. The defense had tried to paint her as a gold digger, a liar, but the evidence was too overwhelming. Constance sat through it all with perfect posture, her face revealing nothing. She didn't testify in her own defense. Her lawyers argued diminished capacity, claimed she'd been following her father's orders, suggested that times were different and morals had evolved. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to life in prison, no possibility of parole. She'd spend her remaining years in a federal facility in Wyoming, far from the territory she'd controlled for so long. When they led her away in chains, Constance looked at Lydia one last time. She didn't speak, didn't nod, didn't acknowledge anything, just looked, and then was gone. The estate was seized by the federal government, its assets liquidated to compensate victims. The process took years, but eventually, families who'd lost land received payment. Not enough. Money could never be enough. But something. Recognition that what had been done to them was wrong. Adrian signed over his claim to everything, spent 6 months helping identify victims and process claims. Then he disappeared. Lydia heard later he'd gone east, changed his name, was working as a clerk in some anonymous office, trying to become someone other than a crow. Thorne used the case to launch investigations across the territory. The Crow prosecution became a template, a blueprint for exposing corruption in a system built to protect it. He won some cases, lost others, but the work continued. Emma was taken in by Martha Yates, who treated her like the daughter she'd never had. The girl slowly stopped flinching at loud noises, stopped jumping at shadows. She learned to read better, to write, to imagine a future that didn't involve serving people who terrified her. And Lydia stayed in Prospect for a while, helping Thorne with investigations, testifying in related cases. But the town felt too small now, too full of memories. Catherine's ghost seemed to haunt every corner, a reminder of what had been lost and what had been saved. 6 months after the trial, Lydia accepted a position with the Federal Land Office. They needed investigators, people who understood fraud, who'd seen how the system could be corrupted. The work was difficult, dangerous sometimes, but it mattered. She traveled across the territory, documenting land claims, interviewing homesteaders, exposing schemes before they could mature into the kind of empire the Crows had built. She was good at it, had learned from the best, after all. Catherine's investigation notes had taught her what to look for, what questions to ask. Sometimes, late at night in another anonymous hotel room, Lydia would think about the girl she'd been when she stepped off that train in Prospect, broke and desperate, looking for safety in a marriage to a stranger. She'd found something else instead, purpose, maybe. Or just proof that she was stronger than she'd known. A year after the trial, Lydia received a letter. The handwriting was precise, feminine, unfamiliar. She opened it carefully. "Miss Hale," it read. "You don't know me, but I knew Catherine Winters. We grew up in the same town, lost touch when she went west. I only recently learned of her death and the circumstances surrounding it. I want to thank you for finishing what she started, for making sure her death meant something, for being the kind of person who stands up even when it would be easier to run. Catherine would have liked you. I wish you could have met under better circumstances. With gratitude, Margaret Walsh." Lydia folded the letter carefully, added it to the small collection of things she kept. Catherine's unfinished warning letter, copied before it was entered as evidence. A photograph of the Mackenzie family, found in the estate records. A list of names, all the people the Crows had destroyed, preserved so they wouldn't be forgotten. She carried these things with her as she traveled, as she investigated, as she slowly helped reshape a system that had been broken for so long. It wasn't glamorous work, wasn't the kind of thing newspapers wrote about, but it was real. 2 years after the trial, Lydia found herself in Helena, working on a case involving railroad land grants. She was in the Territorial Library researching property records when someone sat down across from her. Adrian. He looked different, thinner, dressed in ordinary clothes, hair cut shorter, but his eyes were the same, still carrying the weight of everything he'd done and everything he'd learned. "I heard you were in town," he said quietly. "Heard you'd disappeared." "I did. For a while." He set a folder on the table between them. "Been doing my own investigating. Small cases. Nothing like what you're handling. But I found something I thought you should see." Lydia opened the folder. Inside were documents related to another land fraud scheme, this one in the Northern Territory, smaller than the Crow operation, but using similar methods. "They're connected," Adrian said. "One of my grandfather's old associates. He learned the system, started his own version." "You brought this to the authorities?" "I brought it to you." Adrian met her eyes. "You'll know what to do with it. You always do." They worked together for 3 days, building the case, documenting the fraud. It felt strange at first, uncomfortable. Too many memories between them, but the work smoothed over the awkwardness, gave them a shared purpose. On the last day, sitting in a coffee shop near the library, Adrian finally asked the question Lydia had been waiting for. "Do you regret it? Any of it?" She thought about the question, about everything that had happened since she'd stepped off that train. "I regret Catherine died. I regret all the people who died before we stopped it. But the rest?"
This
She shook
story
her
was
head.
posted on the channel west of Betrayal.
"I don't regret
Please
fighting
do not
back.
repost it in
Even
any
though it
form.
cost you everything, a chance at a normal life, stability, safety. I never wanted normal," Lydia smiled. "I wanted to matter, to be someone who did something that mattered. I got that." Adrian was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry for all of it. For my family, for what they did, for dragging you into—" "Don't." Lydia's voice was firm. "You didn't drag me. I chose to stay, chose to fight. That was my decision, not yours." Still nothing. She stood, gathered her papers. "You can spend your life apologizing for things your grandfather did, or you can spend it trying to fix what he broke. Your choice." She left him there, walked out into Helena's dusty streets. The territory was changing, slowly, painfully. The Railroad Commission had new oversight rules. The Land Office had been reformed, corrupt officials replaced. Federal prosecutors were reviewing hundreds of old cases looking for patterns of fraud. It wasn't enough. Would never be enough to undo the damage. But it was something. Lydia caught a train heading north toward the next case, the next fight. Through the window, she watched Montana roll past. Endless plains, jagged mountains, small towns scattered like dice across the landscape. Somewhere out there, people were still being cheated, still being threatened, still being silenced. But somewhere out there, someone would eventually fight back. And when they did, Lydia would be there to help them finish what they started. The train whistle blew, a long, lonesome sound that echoed across the frontier. Lydia pulled out Catherine's letter one more time, read the words she'd memorized months ago. If you're reading this, I'm already gone. But don't let that stop you. Finish what I started. Make it mean something. She'd kept that promise, would keep it as long as she could. The territory stretched out before her, broken and beautiful, corrupt and wild, slowly healing from wounds that would take generations to fully close, but healing nonetheless. And Lydia Hale, no longer the desperate bride who'd come west looking for safety, rode toward the next fight with clear eyes and steady hands, carrying the weight of everyone who'd fallen before her and the hope of everyone who'd come after. It wasn't the life she'd imagined when she'd answered that advertisement in Philadelphia. It was better.